behavior change isn't rocket science, it's harder than that. It's not just about our willpower or our motivation, it's about our entire environment, our social structures. It's so complex.
So, this is Dr. Chloe Grimmett, a behavioural scientist from Southampton University. Hi, I'm Dr. Owen Colgan, and like you, I'm trying to figure out what actually works for health and longevity. Today, we're uncovering the scientifically proven ways to stick to healthy habits, the one thing that makes or breaks every health goal. Let's jump right in. So, as you've mentioned, we're here to talk about behaviour change. We've probably all suffered a little bit from this. We find it hard to make good behaviours and also, probably more importantly, to keep them sustained for the long term. So, why is that? Why do we find it so hard, firstly, to get started with
Yep.
a healthy behaviour?
I think it's, as you say, it's incredibly common to get stuck in the getting started point. Um, and the way I often think about this, and it's something that we teach physio students actually in our communications modules, is that issue where people get just paralyzed by ambivalence. And what I mean by that is most of us will know about behaviors that we should, in inverted commas, be doing, or we want to do because we know it's good for us, but we get stuck because there's lots of reasons why we can't do that. And it's this, I know I should, but I can't. And that might be because we're stuck with time, all the other stresses we have going on in our lives. And it just makes it really difficult to get started with new things.
Is it possible that naturally we've evolved over millions of years, probably living shorter lives and never really having to think about the long term. Is there maybe at some deep level we're just not wired to think so far ahead and to think about long term survival? Is it more, are we wired more to think more in the short term?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Quite possibly. Certainly when it comes to something like physical activity, we're kind of hardwired to conserve energy in the main. If you think about the kind of hunter gatherer starting point, and we wouldn't necessarily know where the next meal was coming from. So you'd be active to go seek your food, but then you'd be conserving energy until you were able to do that again. So yes, we're definitely probably pushing against some evolutionary kind of want to be more sedentary than active.
So getting started is one thing, and we're all not bad at times in our lives trying to get to do certain things, but it's keeping it up. It's finding it hard to sustain. Why is that so difficult?
I think, there's a fairly famous quote, although no one's quite sure who that's come from, which is behavior change isn't rocket science, it's harder than that. And it's because there's such a complex, interwoven, so many factors that contribute to the way we behave day in and day out. It's not just about our willpower or our motivation, it's about our entire environment, our social structures. It's so complex. And I think, as you say, a lot of us, and a New Year's resolution is an excellent example where you think, right, this is the year that I'm going to get fit, or I'm going to change my diet, or quit smoking, or reduce my alcohol, whatever it is that's important to you. But yes, keeping it up is really difficult. And it's because we are constantly pushing against our environment, particularly when it comes to being active, and the diets that we consume, because our environments are just increasingly set up to make it harder for us to incorporate activity into our days, and really difficult to eat that kind of balanced diet, reducing the ultra processed foods and things like that, because our food environments just aren't set up to support it.
So there are clearly people that seem to manage this. What is different about the people who do sustain healthy lifestyles, and what can we learn from them?
There's so many different things we could think about, and each behavior is very different as well. So physical activity is, something I've spent a lot of time looking into from a research perspective. Um, Personally, I was the kid that grew up doing every sport under the sun. and I've continued to be reasonably active through my adult life. But even as someone who kind of identifies as being someone sporty, there's been periods in my life where I've really struggled to do as much exercise as I'd like to do. Young family, busy job, the things that so many other people have. And I think one of the things that helps for physical activity that keeps people active are those individuals who kind of is part of your self identity almost. I'm a sporty, active person. That's important to who you are, and it's something you enjoy, and it's something that you prioritize in your life. For other people, if they don't have that identity, if they haven't grown up with enjoying sport, I mean, there's so many people out there who would have done everything to get out of PE lessons at school, right? It's really not everybody's cup of tea. But I think when we talk about physical activity promotion, for example, we're not talking about wearing lycra and having to go to the gym and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's about how we view these different behaviors. So yeah, I think from a physical activity perspective, some people are just kind of they enjoy it. It's something that they like to do, and it's easier to sustain it from that point of view.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. We're going to break this up into three categories: motivation, action, and sustainability. We'll probably focus a little bit on physical activity because that's your area of expertise, but we could probably draw some of this into any sort of behavior change.
Mhm.
But let's start with motivation. How do individuals motivate themselves?
It's a great question. I think the first thing is to think about what is the kind of ultimate goal that you're trying to achieve. And I don't necessarily mean I want to be able to run 10K by the end of the year or, train for a marathon. I'm talking more broadly about what is it about being, say, physically active and have a strength base, for example. Why do you want to be able to do that? And an example I give is there was a patient I worked with who was coming up for cancer surgery, and they were taking part in an exercise program. And I asked them, okay, once this surgery's done with and you're recovering, what is it that you really want to be able to get back to doing? And this gentleman said, I've promised my wife I would fix our garden wall for the last like 18 months or so, and he hadn't been well enough to do it. And he really wanted to be able to get back in the garden and to fix that garden wall. That was his motivation for doing this exercise training program. So I think it's about thinking more broadly about why it is that we want to embrace whatever behavior it is that we're looking at. And it's not necessarily just about we want to fit in some smaller jeans or yeah, we want to be able to get that 5K time. It's about thinking more broadly why those behaviors are important to us.
I suspect we've tended in the past to focus on short term goals. Maybe that's part of that evolutionary thing. We've had short term requirements. Something that's come up quite a lot in recent interviews is really thinking about, well, what is the actual reason you're doing something? And it tends to be more for the long term, particularly with physical activity. You're doing it to make your latter years healthier and stronger. And so tell me a little bit about that. What's the difference between short term versus long term goals in terms of motivation? I presume maybe you need a bit of both.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it kind of goes back to that classic thing of, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So you've got this long term ambition, say, physical activity is a great one, particularly as we get older. Like you say, we're looking to develop a lifestyle where we can be confident that we're going to be able to live independently and as high, good a quality of life as we can as we're getting older. So our long-term goal might be something like regularly exercising. That's like part of our lifestyle forevermore. That might be your longer term goal. Or it could be something like you want to run a marathon in 18 months' time. And it's really important to have that vision of where you want to be in the future. That helps to keep you motivated. But it can also feel a bit overwhelming, especially if you're starting from, a base that's a long way off that. So the best way to help keep us motivated is to break that down into shorter term goals. What can we do over the next week and then the week after that? And we build confidence in our ability to start working towards that longer term goal. And a really important part of sustaining any kind of behavior is having the confidence to do it. And we build confidence by having positive experiences. So that's why it's really important to start in a really kind of achievable, short term, small goals to get us going to then start working towards that longer term picture.
Which makes me think of probably what is another common problem is that we often, I say we, I mean, maybe I'm talking a bit too generalistic here, but I think a lot of people start too intensively and we very short term, high demand
Yeah.
interventions, which then become hard to sustain in the long term.
Mhm.
Is there something around, having lesser, smaller goals and just accepting it's a long-term game and building it up nice and slowly and gradually to make it more achievable? Is there something in that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a real classic both with diets, particularly around focused around weight loss and for physical activity and exercise. So oftentimes, we can get really excited about, yes, I'm going to start that exercise program, I'm going to get to the gym, or go for your runs, whatever it is that you're doing, and you hit it really hard and you end up in a lot of pain, basically, because you've pushed your body to a limit. And that can be really off putting. And that's kind of the opposite to what we want to do because it's not reinforcing what you want to do because it's not nice to be in pain. And similarly with diets, for example, if you want to lose weight really fast, and so you do some kind of crash course diet, where you're really limiting your intake of calories, for example, and that's going to work in the short term, but it's not something that you can sustain over time. It's not a productive way to move towards a sustainable behavior that, yeah, you can keep going for the longer term. So definitely it's great to start with that enthusiasm, but it's about thinking, okay, well, I can do that this week, but could I do it the week after that and the week after that? So it's much better to start slow and steady and think, yeah, no, that was great this week. I feel good. I fit it in. My legs aren't in bits from doing too much. I'm gonna maybe add a little bit more next week and build it up steadily.
How much does personality type impact this? Is it easier for some personality types to do this, or are we all motivatable?
I'd say definitely we're all motivatable. I think in terms of your personality, that might come down to how you best play that out in your everyday life. So, for example, some people will be really motivated by the tracking apps that we have, for example, on our watches or our phones, and they like the data and they like to see progress and graphs. Whereas for other people, it might be about just really enjoying a social aspect that they found with a new activity, for example, and that's the thing that keeps them motivated over the longer term. So I think for sure we're all motivatable, which I think is a new word you've just coined. But I think, yeah, how we go about continuing that is the thing that plays into our different kind of personalities.
So I think, correct me if I'm wrong. I think what you're saying is we need short-term goals and long-term goals. That's probably the motivation we need. There needs to be a reason to adopt this healthy change. What about motivating others, either in a professional capacity or even a family member or whatever? What have you learned in your work that would help to motivate others who need that help?
Well, I think first of all, your question is really interesting because you're talking about someone that needs the help, and that comes from our perspective of what somebody else needs or might want. And what I've learned is the key is flipping that the other way around. And it's for that person to identify something that's important to them and something that they want, or the behavior change is very unlikely to be successful, particularly in the longer term. So let's take, for example, somebody who, let's say we're trying to support a relative or a patient or someone who has some kind of breathing difficulty, let's say COPD, but they are a smoker. And we as a health professional, for example, might be very motivated to support that person to quit smoking. But it's really important that that desire comes from within that individual, or it's unlikely to happen. And the way that we try to tap into that, there's lots of different sort of psychological methods behind it. So, motivational interviewing, for example, is one that people use a lot. And that's really based on the idea that each of us has within ourselves the answers to these questions of how we can best go about these things. And our job is to help kind of help the individual find that. The vast majority of people know smoking is not good for them. Someone with COPD will have been told more than once that, their smoking behavior won't be helping their condition. But there could be all sorts of reasons why that individual smokes. And unless we really understand that, we can't help them move past it. So perhaps that individual uses smoking because it's the only thing they have that can help them deal with stress in their life. You try and take away that smoking from them, they've got a bigger problem as far as they're concerned, because now they're super stressed out and they've got no way of dealing with it. And their condition itself makes it really stressful environment for them. So it's about trying to understand and kind of talking to that individual about their ambivalence, about what it is, how smoking helps them in their everyday life and understanding that. And what the other side of the coin is if they see any negative sides of it, and really trying to tease that out. And it's not until we understand the kind of, let's say, the behavior that we think is less constructive or the unfavorable one, until we understand why someone's behaving in a certain way, it's really difficult to help move move past that. So another thing that we've found really helpful in terms of supporting other people to become motivated or to make a behavior change is something we call the confidence ruler and the motivation ruler. So let's say we're talking to somebody about um, a, a behavior that they want to change. And we say, okay, so if we were to think of a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being not confident at all, and 10 being absolutely confident that you can achieve the thing that you're hoping to achieve, where would you put yourself on that scale? And let's say the person says, I don't know, maybe a 4. And you might think, oh, okay, that's not great, a 4 out of 10 in confidence. But what it tells us is that person needs a way to help build that confidence to give them the chance of being successful in that behavior. So it's a really useful question to ask because it gives you a sense of where someone is. If they're leaving a consultation and they're only a 4 out of 10, then you might expect them to struggle to do what they're doing. However, if we explore where that number 4 comes from and we say, okay, that's interesting. So you're not a 3 or a 2 or a 1. What is it that makes you a 4? And then we focus in on where that person is getting that small amount of confidence from. And that can help build conversations around, okay, so you're confident because of X. Let's explore that a bit more. Talk to me a bit more about that. And that can actually help a person talk themselves into feeling a bit more confident about something and helping us identify ways where we might be able to support them. And the same thing can happen around motivation. So if we're talking about, okay, so how motivated are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And again, if someone says, okay, well, about 4, okay, well, it's not great if your job is the person to help motivate that individual to do something, but we can use that, you're not a 2 or a 3, where's that 4 coming from to help support those constructive conversations about becoming more motivated.
How much is shock tactics helpful? The pictures of lungs with cancer on cigarette packets. But even recently, I saw a video and it became very resonant for me. It was a video of a healthy older person and then an unhealthy, frail older person. And it was kind of asking, which of these do you want to be? And that was very resonant. And I've adopted that into my long term motivation. Is that something that's helpful for most, or is it a kind of a final resort for some, or is it just it depends on the person?
Yeah, I think depends on the person. I think generally speaking, the scare tactics are less helpful, particularly if someone is not in a place where they're particularly open to the idea of change. So a really good example is people might remember the adverts for trying to support stopping smoking, and you had like the picture of the cigarette with the tumor kind of growing out of the end of it, or the diseased lungs, and it's really emotive, it's really affronting, but it's unlikely to be the thing that tips someone over the edge from not doing to doing, for example. But that's not to say it's not helpful for some. So sometimes these things will really resonate, and it might depend on what else is going on that person's life, particularly as we get older, we start looking more into, wanting to have that, independent, fulfilling life. And so when we're a bit more aware of our own mortality, perhaps those things are more impactful. But I think on a population level, I don't think there's a huge amount of evidence to show that it's particularly useful.
So you've done a lot of work in prehabilitation. You might actually maybe just explain what that is, but what have you learned in that space that would translate to general healthy choices?
Mhm. So, prehabilitation is a term people might not be familiar with. Most people will have heard of rehabilitation. So, when we've had an injury, for example, we might have a rehab program to help us get back to being fit and well. Prehabilitation is about getting us fit and well before an injury happens. And so, in my field of work, that's mostly actually been around cancer. So an individual receives a diagnosis of cancer, and they are likely to have variation in terms of treatment. It could be chemotherapy, surgery, radiotherapy, a combination of all of that. And we know that going through all of those treatments um, is a really, really tough challenge on the body. And so it kind of makes sense intuitively that the fitter we are, both physically and psychologically, the more likely we are to recover quicker afterwards. So, prehabilitation is all about optimizing our fitness physically and mentally before we go into a big challenge of something like a big cancer surgery or cancer treatments.
So I presume there's a clear motivation for those people. They have, in some ways, that shock thing. You have this diagnosis. There is a reality here. And if you do this, then you will have such and such an outcome. It probably feels that people have a motivation there. Well, what can we learn from that in terms of helping people to make just general healthy choices if they don't have that kind of scare in their lives?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the term teachable moment is something that's been used in that kind of instance. So, something like a cancer diagnosis can be a real teachable moment for evaluating various aspects of our lives and what we want to get out of the future. But it doesn't necessarily need to be something as significant as a cancer diagnosis, which is obviously, terrible experience for anyone to go through. But we all have little junctions in our life that might bring us up a bit short. So I don't know, your 40 plus health check that you get at the GP, and oh, actually your cholesterol's not quite as good as you thought it might be, or your pre-diabetes checks and things like that. There's often moments that we come across, or even, running for the bus and you're absolutely exhausted. You can't believe how tired you are from just running 40 yards down the road. There's things that can bring us up quite short, and they can act sometimes as a bit of a wake up call and think, okay, maybe things might need to change. But I think in terms of the prehab work, one of the things that's been most rewarding from that is seeing patients take up, say, this exercise program, change to their diet, whatever it might be, for that particular issue of getting through their cancer treatment. But we've had patients so we've had some clinical trials running at Southampton in prehab, and patients go on exercise bikes in a very bespoke exercise program that's really designed to increase their fitness over the course of a particular period of time. And I remember a lady who was in her early 80s who'd never been anywhere near an exercise bike or a gym or anything like that. And you could see she was really apprehensive about what she was about to do, but really keen to do it. And she was really well supported by the staff at Southampton. And she did so well in this exercise program. And she went through the surgery really well and was discharged in as quick a time as she could possibly hope to have been. And it was a real success story. And we caught up with her afterwards and discovered that she bought herself an exercise bike, which she now had at home and she used every other day. And it was because of that experience that she had through that prehabilitation journey that she could feel the sense of the benefit that that was giving her, and she didn't want it to stop, and continued to exercise afterwards. And I think that's been one of the really magic things that we've seen in some of that prehab work is it enables people to start something with the support that they need. If it's something that's unfamiliar, it's a bit scary, you don't know what to do, what's safe, and it's new environments. If you do that in a really supportive way, it can give you the confidence and the motivation to continue to do it afterwards. And we've definitely seen that with some of our patients, which has been fabulous.
Okay, so I think we're motivated. We've got some short-term, long-term goals. I guess now the next step is action, which is really, setting ourselves up for success. How do we, implement to be effective and long-lasting? So how would you recommend we go about doing that?
Yeah, I think one of the key things here is to be as specific as we possibly can be about what we're trying to achieve. Let's say somebody wants to be more active and they've set themselves a goal of, I don't know, perhaps uh, walking 7,000 steps a day in a couple of days of the week. Being really specific about the days that you're going to do that and the time in the day that you might be able to achieve it can be really, really helpful. And sometimes I liken this to, if we've got an appointment in our diary, typically we'll keep it. Let's say, that's a medical appointment, or you've arranged to see a friend, or you've got to be at work at a particular time. It's in your diary, you're committed to doing it. And I think having that element of specific goal setting can be really helpful. So great that you've got this idea of, okay, I want to be more active next week. Okay, well, when are you going to do that? What time of day are you going to be able to fit that in? And if you start challenge yourself to thinking, oh, okay, well, actually, no, Tuesday's not a great day because, I've got to get the kids to breakfast club and then I've got this meeting, whatever. But Wednesday, I'm working from home. Maybe I could use my lunch break. Yeah, okay, that will work. Between meetings, I could probably get out for a walk between, say, 12 and 1 o'clock. And then we put that in our diary and we look ahead and we plan. And that can be really helpful, particularly in the early days of setting up our new behaviors. And even things like getting as prepared as possible to do that. So, have we got a pair of trainers that still fit and haven't got holes on them? Whether okay, put them by the front door. If it's a dietary change, for example, okay, well, have we got the food in the house that we want to be eating? Have we got the recipes that look like, something that excites you? Yeah, I want to eat that. Let's give that a go. It's about setting up as many of those practical steps as you can to give yourself every success of achieving what you're hoping to achieve.
So it often feels when we're starting a behavior change that there's a lot of effort involved. Oh no, now I've got to find extra time. I've got to go to the gym. I've got to. There seems to be a lot of reasons to not do it.
For
If
sure.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of simple ways around that?
Yeah, I think definitely when we talk to people about physical activity, not having enough time is one of the biggest challenges that people have. And one thing that's been introduced fairly recently is this concept of snacktivity. It's about exercise snacking or physical activity snacking. So people might have heard the kind of this general recommendation of 30 minutes of physical activity on most days of the week. And 30 minutes in one block can feel just too much for a lot of people to find the time to do it. But you might be able to find 5 minutes here or there between activities or whatever other errands and responsibilities you've got. And you can do a quick 5 minutes of something and you build a few of those in during the day. And before you know it, you've done 15 or 20 minutes of physical activity that you wouldn't have otherwise done. So there are kind of ways that we can incorporate things like physical activity into our day. Another one And I guess this is like a personal example. So if you've got children that you're taking to various sporting activities, for example, that can often feel like, right, well, I can't do any activity because I'm taking my child here or there. If you're taking them to the football training or football match and you're hanging around while they're warming up, there might be somewhere you can go for a walk yourself. My daughter fairly recently got into climbing, and I found myself sitting around in the climbing gym getting cold and bored. And then one day I thought, why am I doing this? I'm going to give it a go. And turns out it's brilliant fun, and there was a great bunch of people to meet and enjoy it with. And then I started climbing a couple of times a week, very poorly, but enjoyed it nonetheless. And that was a way that I managed to incorporate a bit more activity into my day to day. So it was about looking for those opportunities, I guess, for when you can incorporate activity into a part of your day that you might not have thought of. Can you just maybe give yourself a few more minutes to do a fast walk somewhere rather than jumping in the car, for example?
I presume one of the key things, or what would be most advantageous, is if you loved the thing.
For sure.
But another problem is sometimes it's not always super pleasurable. We don't have the luxury of finding an activity that we absolutely love to do. If that is the case, and we just know that we have to do it for a good reason, is there a way to make it less unenjoyable, let's say?
Yeah, for sure. No, you're absolutely right. If we can find something that we really enjoy, when you ask any kind of exercise scientist, what's the best exercise somebody can do? They'll almost certainly say whichever one they're going to keep doing, the thing that you enjoy. You're absolutely right. But some people just really find it difficult to get any enjoyment out of, exercise or physical activity. So, like you say, coupling it with something else that you do enjoy can be a really helpful thing. So, let's say you enjoy listening to podcasts, like we're recording today. Perhaps take the time to download some podcasts that you want to listen to, or some music that you want to listen to, and do that while you're doing the thing that you're not so keen on. Or if you've got an exercise machine at home, putting it near the TV so you can catch up on that box set while you're doing a bit of exercise, then things like that can help. And I think also keeping a track. So we talk in the trade about something called behavior change techniques. And these are what are the kind of active ingredients of interventions we might develop to support people to change a behavior. And one of the behavior change techniques with the most evidence for being helpful in supporting behavior change is something called self monitoring. And that's just keeping a track of what we're doing. And you can see the explosion of that in the apps on our phones and the fancy watches that you can buy. But keeping a track of what you're doing over a period of time, helping you keep that streak for however many steps a day you're trying to do, or trying to do your 3 lots of runs in the week, or whatever it might be. Keeping a diary of what you're doing, monitoring your behavior in some way can help us stay motivated to keep doing it, and can give us a sense of achievement when we look back and say, wow, this time last year I was only doing whatever, and I'm doing much more now. So like that can be a useful thing to help keeping us motivated, especially if it's something that we don't particularly love doing.
So there's quite a lot to think about, isn't there? And I guess it's probably, would I be right in saying it's going to feel a bit effortful in the beginning? What does the science tell us about how long it takes for habits to form? I presume if you do something long enough, eventually it will just become embedded into your natural rhythms, let's say.
Yeah.
And anything you'd like to say around that?
You're absolutely right that any kind of change is really effortful. And I think that's the thing that is really helpful to remember. And as I said before, it's not just about willpower. I think sometimes we can be really hard on ourselves and we think, right, I'm gonna do something. And you see on social media the 5 a.m. club or whatever this is, there's people out there that are getting up and doing it all the time. And I'm just something lacking in me. I just haven't got the willpower to do it. It's really not that straightforward. Making any change is really effortful, and it's much more than just willpower. In terms of the habit thing, again, absolutely right. The longer we do something, the more likely we are to ingrain it into our everyday. In terms of how long it takes to form those habits, it really depends on the behavior. So if it's something quite simple, then those habits might form, I don't know, say between around 20, 25 days, something like that. And we're talking about something more of a kind of discrete behavior like cleaning your teeth at a particular time of day, or maybe we're trying to support our children's hand hygiene, for example, and getting them to wash their hands when they come in from school, that kind of thing. Those behaviors are quicker to be formed into habits than something more complex like a change to your diet or a change to your physical activity pattern. That can take a lot longer. You can't really say, okay, once you've been doing it for, I don't know, 83 days, then you're good. You're going to be fine forever. That's kind of not how it works. But yes, it is really important to remember that it is a process, and even once we have these habits, even once they've been formed for a long period of time, we can still fall off the wagon. There will still be times when we kind of relapse back to old behaviors, and it's just really important to have a bit of self-compassion, to not beat yourself up about that, and to be really aware that that happens for everybody. It happens for professional athletes if they get injured, let alone just, the likes of you or I, just having a go at trying to keep as active as we can, for example.
Would I be right in thinking that there might be even a decision to be made when starting a new habit about identifying what sort of support that you might need to do that? Some people might be super motivated, no, I can do this on my own. Some people may need the support of others, like in a group type setting. What would you say to that? And is it worth, being quite thoughtful or mindful of that in the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a real variation from person to person. So, like you say, for some people, having that commitment to doing something with others can be really helpful. And sometimes we can talk about that in terms of like a social contract, right? You've made an agreement with a friend, excuse me, or a group of friends that you're going to do whatever it is that you might do. I don't know, you're going to start a running group together, or you want to join some sort of sports club or go regularly to an exercise class. And you agree to do that together. And that can be really helpful because when it comes to the night before or the morning of, and you're thinking, oh, do you know what? I really don't want to do this, but I promised my pal that I was going to go. And it helps give you that extra little push to stay committed to something that you're doing. And for some people, that can be really, really positive. And also, just being somewhere in a social environment can be a really motivating factor for some people. They want to have that time socializing as well as doing some activity, and that can be a real motivator for going. They might want to go as much to see their friends and have a chat as they want to do the activity. Whereas for others, actually it's something that they just want to get on with by themselves, and perhaps it actually gives them a little bit of time out of their busy, demanding life, and they just want a little bit of quiet to themselves. And it's a great excuse to say, right, no, this is the time that I'm going to go and do some exercise, go for a walk or a run or whatever it is that you're doing, and just have that little bit of time to yourself. So it's really about working out what works for you. And it might be that for some activities, you want to do those by yourself, whereas something else you might prefer to do in a group. So it's not to say that one person either likes to, say, exercise by themselves or alone. It might really be dependent on the thing that they want to do. But identifying where you get your buzz from, what helps you is definitely gonna be a step in the right direction.
So, if you don't mind, we'll talk a little bit more about sustainability. I think we've talked a bit about it in this section on actions. The ideal way is to build it in such a way that it becomes sustainable. But in terms of thinking of sustainability separately, is there anything else that we can do? So we've set it up, we're doing it, but it's really maintaining that for the rest of your life, isn't it? That's the thing, because I think people have short term goals. I need to lose weight by 6 months, but we need to be doing this for the rest of our lives. So,
Mhm.
how do we keep that up?
You're absolutely right. Setting things up well is obviously the first step. So we've talked about finding something, hopefully, that we enjoy, or if we don't enjoy, we're coupling with something that either we need to do or that we enjoy doing. We've talked about being really specific about making that kind of contractual commitment to our diary, to ourselves, to others that we might be choosing to do something with. And doing something like self-monitoring, keeping a track of what you're doing so you can see your progress. All of those things can be really, really helpful. And really importantly is knowing that at some point it's going to go a bit wrong and there's going to be a period of time where we fall off the wagon and things aren't working quite as well as we'd hope. Say for physical activity, we suddenly have a really busy period of time that we just can't fit something in, or we have caring commitments, or we become unwell. All manner of things can get in the way. And it's preparing for what we're going to do when that happens, not if it happens, but when it happens. And I think it's really important to see that not as a failure, but that an indication that you're trying really hard and you're doing something positive. If you had a go at something and it's gone well for a period of time and then you've reverted back again, it shows that you've made the effort, you can do it. And it's about, again, having that self compassion to say, okay, we've gone backwards a little bit here, but we can pick ourselves up. And so thinking about what we're going to do. And I think one of the things in some of the kind of psychology models, we we talk about setting if then plans. So if this happens, then this is what I'm going to do. And that can happen with this kind of relapse process of, okay, if I have a couple of weeks where things don't go well, how am I going to pick up again? And so for exercise, for example, if we have been doing something for a period of time and then we don't do it for a couple of weeks, it can actually be pretty difficult to get back to it again. It can feel physically more demanding. Anyone that sort of started running and then stopped running and then tried to start again, you think, oh God, that those first few sessions back are really tricky. So I think it's about just knowing that that's going to be the case is really helpful, and knowing that you carry on a couple more sessions and things will get back to how you were before. So thinking about what we're going to do if we fall off the wagon and how we're going to get back on can be really helpful.
So there's clearly quite a bit to think about. For those people that are listening that also perhaps have that extra layer of challenge, perhaps they have a physical ailment, or maybe they're carrying a bit more weight, and there's that extra level of, I guess, barrier or burden. Any messages that you would have for those people?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things to be mindful of with people who maybe are doing very little, if we're talking about physical activity, for example, the people who stand to gain the most from increasing the activity is those that are doing the least. So if you take an individual who's really struggling to fit any kind of physical activity into their day, just doing a bit will have a really big impact on their well-being compared to somebody who's already doing quite a lot and does a bit more. So I think that's really important to remember that any movement, any kind of physical activity is better than none. And those that are starting with the least amount of activity as a kind of baseline have got the most to gain. So I think that's a really positive message. And as I say, the smallest amount is beneficial. We know that for some people it can be really tricky. For example, people who have arthritis, for example, and joint pain, then that can be particularly difficult. But again, what we do know, and you'll hear physios saying this, motion is lotion, and exercise or physical activity, just starting to get the joints moving, although uncomfortable to start with, you can actually find that a bit more activity can actually reduce the amount of pain for things like that. And like you say, people who perhaps are carrying a lot of weight doing physical activity can feel really uncomfortable. And again, it's not about pushing yourself to the absolute limit to breaking point, just getting your heart rate up, moving a bit more, and just starting gradually and building up slowly can be a really positive place to start.
Dr. Chloe Grimmett, thank you so much for your time today. We usually just say if you'd like to just leave our listeners with any little final comments, just little take home messages, what would they be?
I think probably the one of the key things to remember when any of us are trying to start something new is to remember it's not just about willpower. And if we're not as successful as we want to be, particularly in the early stages, it's not just a failure of willpower. We're battling against a whole environment that's not set up necessarily to support the thing that we want to do. So I think that's really important. And also trying to think quite carefully have a kind of planning stage before you start embarking on something new can be a really good investment of time. So, thinking carefully about what it is that you want to do, why you want to do it, how you're going to fit it in to your everyday, the when, the where, the how, and what you're going to do when things don't go quite as well as we'd like them to. Oftentimes, when we're making these plans about things that we want to do in the future, we're thinking about it when we are our most positive selves, when we're feeling buoyant and optimistic and positive and motivated and we have energy. And we forget that there's going to be times when we want to be doing this thing where we're not feeling any of that and we're exhausted and we're a bit unwell and we're stressed. And we need to factor that in and think, okay, well, when I'm my best self, I might be able to achieve X, Y, or Z. When things are really tough, I might just have to dial that back a little bit, but that's still doing more than I might otherwise. So just planning for those things that get in our way and looking for that thing that you want to do that hopefully you find some enjoyment from. Perhaps you enjoy doing it with other people. And yeah, just trying to find something that keeps you motivated for the longer term and look back and just give yourself a bit of a pat on the back when you can see that you've made progress from where you were maybe a few weeks or months before.
Dr. Grimmett, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.